From the caves and jungles of Hindustan. The famous narrative by Madame Blavatsky, On the Way to Karli. It is an early morning near the end of March. A light breeze caresses with its velvety hand the sleepy faces of the pilgrims, and the intoxicating perfume of tuberoses mingles with the pungent odors of the bazaar. Crowds of barefooted Brahmin women, stately and well-formed, direct their steps, like the biblical Rachel, to the well, with brass water pots, bright as gold upon their heads. On our way lie numerous sacred tanks, filled with stagnant water, in which Hindus of both sexes perform their prescribed morning ablutions. Under the hedge of a garden, somebody's tame mongoose is devouring the head of a cobra. The headless body of the snake convulsively, but harmlessly, beats against the thin flanks of the little animal, which regards these vain efforts with an evident delight. Side by side with this group of animals is a human figure, a naked Mali, gardener, offering betel and salt to a monstrous stone idol of Shiva, with the view of pacifying the wrath of the destroyer, excited by the death of the cobra, which is one of his favorite servants. A few steps before reaching the railway station, we meet a modest Catholic procession, consisting of a few newly converted pariahs and some of the native Portuguese. Under a baldachin is a litter, on which swings to and fro a dusky Madonna, dressed after the fashion of the native goddesses with a ring in her nose. In her arms she carries the Holy Babe, clad in yellow pajamas and a red bra-manacle turban. "Hari, Hari, Devaki, glory to the Holy Virgin," exclaim the converts, unconscious of any difference between the Devaki, mother of Krishna, and the Catholic Madonna. All they know is that, excluded from the temples by the Brahmins, on account of their not belonging to any of the Hindu castes, they are admitted sometimes into the Christian pagodas, thanks to the padres, a name adopted from the Portuguese padre, and applied indiscriminately to the missionaries of every European sect. At last, our garas, native two-wheeled vehicles drawn by a pair of strong bullocks, arrived at the station. English employees open wide their eyes at the sight of white-faced people traveling about the town in gilded Hindu chariots. But we are true Americans, and we have come hither to study, not Europe, but India and her products on the spot. If the tourist casts a glance on the shore opposite to the port of Bombay, he will see a dark blue mass rising like a wall between himself and the horizon. This is Parbul, a flat-topped mountain 2,250 feet high. Its right slope leans on two sharp rocks covered with woods. The highest of them, Mataran, is the object of our trip. From Bombay to Narel, a station situated at the foot of this mountain, we are to travel 4 hours by railway, though, as the crow flies, the distance is not more than 12 miles. The railroad wanders round the foot of the most charming little hills, skirts hundreds of pretty lakes, and pierces with more than 20 tunnels the very heart of the rocky Ghats. We were accompanied by 3 Hindu friends. 2 of them once belonged to a high caste, but were excommunicated from their pagoda for association and friendship with us, unworthy foreigners. At the station, our party was joined by 2 more natives, with whom we had been in correspondence for many a year. All were members of our society, reformers of the Young India School, enemies of Brahmins, castes, aid prejudices, and were to be our fellow travellers, and visit with us the annual fair at the temple festivities of Karli, stopping on the way at Mataran and Kanduli. One was a Brahman from Pune, the second a Mudaliar, landowner from Madras, the third a Sinhalese from Kagala, the fourth a Bengali zemindar, and the fifth a gigantic Rajput, whom we had known for a long time by the name of Gulab Lal Singh, and had called simply Gulab Singh. I shall dwell upon his personality more than on any of the others, because the most wonderful and diverse stories were in circulation about this strange man. It was asserted that he belonged to the sect of Raj yogis and was an initiate of the mysteries of magic alchemy and various other occult sciences of India. He was rich and independent, and rumour did not dare to suspect him of deception, the more so because, though quite full of these sciences, he never uttered a word about them in public, and carefully concealed his knowledge from all except a few friends. He was an independent Thakur from Rajasthan, a province the name of which means the land of kings. Thakurs are, almost without exception, descended from the Surya, sun, and are accordingly called Suryavansa. They are prouder than any other nation in the world. They have a proverb, "The dirt of the earth cannot stick to the rays of the sun." They do not despise any sect, except the Brahmins, and honour only the bards who sing their military achievements. Of the latter, Colonel Todd writes somewhat as follows: "The magnificence and luxury of the Rajput courts in the early periods of history were truly wonderful, even when due allowance is made for the poetical license of the bards. From the earliest times, northern India was a wealthy country, and it was precisely here that was situated the richest satrapy of Darius. At all events, this country abounded in those most striking events which furnish history with her richest materials. In Rajasthan, every small kingdom had its Thermopylae, and every little town has produced its Leonidas. But the veil of the centuries hides from posterity events that the pen of the historian might have bequeathed to the everlasting admiration of the nations. Somnath might have appeared as a rival of Delphi, the treasures of Hind might outweigh the riches of the king of Lydia, while compared with the army of the brothers Pandu, that of Xerxes would seem an inconsiderable handful of men, worthy only to rank in the second place. Asterisk, in nearly every instance, the passages quoted from various authorities have been retranslated from the Russian. As the time and labour needful for verification would he too great, the sense only of these passages is given here. They do not pretend to be textual. Translator. England did not disarm the Rajputs, as she did the rest of the Indian nations, so Gulab Singh came accompanied by vassals and shield-bearers. Possessing an inexhaustible knowledge of legends, and being evidently well acquainted with the antiquities of his country, Gulab Singh proved to be the most interesting of our companions. "There, against the blue sky," said Gulab Lal Singh, "you behold the majestic Bau Malin. That deserted spot was once the abode of a holy hermit. Now it is visited yearly by crowds of pilgrims. According to popular belief, the most wonderful things happen there. Miracles. At the top of the mountain, 2,000 feet above the level of the sea, is the platform of a fortress. Behind it rises another rock 270 feet in height, and at the very summit of this peak are to be found the ruins of a still more ancient fortress, which for 75 years served as a shelter for this hermit. Whence he obtained his food will forever remain a mystery. Some think he ate the roots of wild plants, but upon this barren rock there is no vegetation. The only mode of ascent of this perpendicular mountain consists of a rope and holes just big enough to receive the toes of a man cut out of the living rock. One would think such a pathway accessible only to acrobats and monkeys. Surely fanaticism must provide wings for the Hindus, for no accident has ever happened to any of them. Unfortunately, about 40 years ago, a party of Englishmen conceived the unhappy thought of exploring the ruins, but a strong gust of wind arose and carried them over the precipice. After this, General Dickinson gave orders for the destruction of all means of communication with the upper fortress, and the lower one, once the cause of so many losses and so much bloodshed, is now entirely deserted and serves only as a shelter for eagles and tigers. Listening to these tales of olden times, I could not help comparing the past with the present. What a difference! Kali Yuga, cry old Hindus with grim despair. Who can strive against the age of darkness? This fatalism, the certainty that nothing good can be expected now, the conviction that even the powerful god Shiva himself can neither appear nor help them, are all deeply rooted in the minds of the old generation. As for the younger men, they receive their education in high schools and universities, learn by heart. Herbert Spencer, John Stuart Mill, Darwin, and the German philosophers, and entirely lose all respect, not only for their own religion, but for every other in the world. The young, educated Hindus are materialists almost without exception, and often achieve the last limits of atheism. They seldom hope to attain to anything better than a situation as chief mate of the junior clerk, as we say in Russia, and either become sycophants, disgusting flatterers of their present lords, or, which is still worse, or at any rate sillier, begin to edit a newspaper full of cheap liberalism, which gradually develops into a revolutionary organ. But all this is only en passant. Compared with the mysterious and grandiose past of India, the ancient Aryavata, her present is a natural Indian ink background, the black shadow of a bright picture, the inevitable evil in the cycle of every nation. India has become decrepit and has fallen down, like a huge memorial of antiquity, prostrate and broken to pieces. But the most insignificant of these fragments will forever remain a treasure for the archaeologist and the artist, and, in the course of time, may even afford a clue to the philosopher and the psychologist. Ancient Hindus built like giants and finished their work like goldsmiths, says Archbishop Heber describing his travel in India. In his description of the Taj Mahal of Agra, that veritable eighth wonder of the world, he calls it a poem in marble. He might have added that it is difficult to find in India a ruin in the least state of preservation that cannot speak, more eloquently than whole volumes, of the past of India, her religious aspirations, her beliefs and hopes. There is not a country of antiquity, not even excluding the Egypt of the pharaohs, where the development of the subjective ideal into its demonstration by an objective symbol has been expressed more graphically, more skillfully, and artistically than in India. The whole pantheism of the Vedanta is contained in the symbol of the bisexual deity Ardhanari. It is surrounded by the double triangle, known in India under the name of the sign of Vishnu. By his side lie a lion, a bull, and an eagle. In his hands there rests a full moon, which is reflected in the waters at his feet. The Vedanta has taught for thousands of years what some of the German philosophers began to preach at the end of last century and the beginning of this one, namely, that everything objective in the world, as well as the world itself, is no more than an illusion, a maya, a phantom created by our imagination, and as unreal as the reflection of the moon upon the surface of the waters. The phenomenal world, as well as the subjectivity of our conception concerning our egos, are nothing but, as it were, a mirage. The true sage will never submit to the temptations of illusion. He is well aware that man will attain to self-knowledge and become a real ego only after the entire union of the personal fragment with the all, thus becoming an immutable, infinite, universal Brahma. Accordingly, he considers the whole cycle of birth, life, old age, and death as the sole product of imagination. Generally speaking, Indian philosophy, split up as it is into numerous metaphysical teachings, possesses, when united to Indian ontological doctrines, such a well-developed logic, such a wonderfully refined psychology, that it might well take the first rank when contrasted with the schools, ancient and modern, idealist or positivist, and eclipse them all in turn. That positivism expounded by Lewis, that makes each particular hair on the heads of Oxford theologians stand on end, is ridiculous child's play compared with the atomistic school of Vaisheshika, with its world divided, like a chessboard, into 6 categories of everlasting atoms, 9 substances, 24 qualities, and 5 motions. And, however difficult, and even impossible, may seem the exact representation of all these abstract ideas, idealistic, pantheistic, and sometimes purely material. In the condensed shape of allegorical symbols, India, nevertheless, has known how to express all these teachings more or less successfully. She has immortalized them in her ugly, four-headed idols, in the geometrical, complicated forms of her temples, and even in the entangled lines and spots on the foreheads of her sectaries. We were discussing this and other topics with our Hindu fellow travelers when a Catholic padre, a teacher in the Jesuit College of St. Xavier in Bombay, entered our carriage at one of the stations. Soon he could contain himself no longer and joined in our conversation. Smiling and rubbing his hands, he said that he was curious to know, on the strength of what sophistry, our companions could find anything resembling a philosophical explanation in the fundamental idea of the four faces of this ugly Shiva crowned with snakes, pointing with his finger to the idol at the entrance to a pagoda. "It is very simple," answered the Bengali Babu. "You see that its four faces are turned towards the four cardinal points, south, north, west, and east, but all these faces are on one body and belong to one God." "Would you mind explaining first the philosophical idea of the four faces and 8 hands of your Shiva?" interrupted the Padre. "With great pleasure, thinking that our great Rudra, the Vedic name for this god, is omnipresent. We represent him with his face turned simultaneously in all directions. 8 hands indicate his omnipotence, and his single body serves to remind us that he is one, though he is everywhere, and nobody can avoid his all-seeing eye or his chastising hand." The Padre was going to say something when the train stopped. We had arrived at Narel. It is hardly 25 years since, for the first time, a white man ascended Mataran, a huge mass of various kinds of trap rock, for the most part crystalline in form. Though quite near to Bombay and only a few miles from Kandala, the summer residence of the Europeans, the threatening heights of this giant were long considered inaccessible. On the north, its smooth, almost vertical face rises 2,450 feet over the valley of the River Pen, and, further on, numberless separate rocks and hillocks, covered with thick vegetation and divided by valleys and precipices, rise up to the clouds. In 1854, the railway pierced one of the sides of Mataran, and now has reached the foot of the last mountain, stopping at Narel, where, not long ago, there was nothing but a precipice. From Narel to the upper plateau is but 8 miles, which you may travel on a pony, or in an open or closed palanquin, as you choose. Considering that we arrived at Narel about 6 in the evening, this course was not very tempting. Civilization has done much with inanimate nature, but, in spite of all its despotism, it has not yet been able to conquer tigers and snakes. Tigers, no doubt, are banished to the more remote jungles, but all kinds of snakes, especially cobras and coralillos, which last by preference inhabit trees, still abound in the forests of Mataran as in days of old, and wage a regular guerrilla warfare against the invaders. Woe betide the belated pedestrian, or even horseman, if he happens to pass under a tree which forms the ambuscade of a coralillo snake. Cobras and other reptiles seldom attack men, and will generally try to avoid them, unless accidentally trodden upon. But these guerrilleros of the forest, the tree serpents, lie in wait for their victims. As soon as the head of a man comes under the branch which shelters the coralillo, this enemy of man, coiling its tail round the branch, dives down into space with all the length of his body and strikes with its fangs at the man's forehead. This curious fact was long considered to be a mere fable, but it has now been verified, and belongs to the natural history of India. In these cases, the natives see in the snake the envoy of death, the fulfiller of the will of the bloodthirsty Karli, the spouse of Shiva. But evening, after the scorchingly hot day, was so tempting and held out to us from the distance such promise of delicious coolness, that we decided upon risking our fate. In the heart of this wondrous nature one longs to shake off earthly chains, and unite oneself with the boundless life, so that death itself has its attractions in India. Besides, the full moon was about to rise at 8 p.m., 3 hours ascent of the mountain, on such a moonlit tropical night as would tax the descriptive powers of the greatest artists, was worth any sacrifice. Apropos, among the few artists who can fix upon canvas the subtle charm of a moonlit night in India, public opinion begins to name our own V.V. Vereshchagin. Having dined hurriedly in the dak bungalow, we asked for our sedan chairs, and, drawing our roof-like tapis over our eyes, we started. 8 coolies, clad as usual in vine leaves, took possession of each chair and hurried up the mountain, uttering the shrieks and yells no true Hindu can dispense with. Each chair was accompanied besides by a relay of 8 more porters, so we were 64, without counting the Hindus and their servants, an army sufficient to frighten any stray leopard or jungle tiger, in fact any animal, except our fearless cousins on the side of our great-grandfather Hanuman. As soon as we turned into a thicket at the foot of the mountain, several dozens of these kinsmen joined our procession. Thanks to the achievements of Rama's ally, monkeys are sacred in India. The government, emulating the earlier wisdom of the East India Company, forbids everyone to molest them, not only when met with in the forests, which in all justice belong to them, but even when they invade the city gardens. Leaping from one branch to another, chattering like magpies, and making the most formidable grimaces, they followed us all the way, like so many midnight spooks. Sometimes they hung on the trees in full moonlight, like forest nymphs of Russian mythology. Sometimes they preceded us, awaiting our arrival at the turns of the road as if showing us the way. They never left us. One monkey babe alighted on my knees. In a moment, the authoress of his being, jumping without any ceremony over the coolie's shoulders, came to his rescue, picked him up, and, after making the most ungodly grimace at me, ran away with him. "Bandras, monkeys, bring luck with their presents," remarked one of the Hindus, as if to console me for the loss of my crumpled topi. "Besides," he added, "seeing them here, we may be sure that there is not a single tiger for 10 miles round." Higher and higher we ascended by the steep winding path, and the forest grew perceptibly thicker, darker, and more impenetrable. Some of the thickets were as dark as graves. Passing under 100-year-old banyans, it was impossible to distinguish one's own finger at the distance of 2 inches. It seemed to me that in certain places it would not be possible to advance without feeling our way. But our coolies never made a false step, but hastened onwards. Not one of us uttered a word. It was as if we had agreed to be silent at these moments. We felt as though wrapped in the heavy veil of darkness, and no sound was heard but the short, irregular breathing of the porters and the cadence of their quick, nervous footsteps upon the stony soil of the path. One felt sick at heart and ashamed of belonging to that human race, one part of which makes of the other mere beasts of burden. These poor wretches are paid for their work 4 annas a day all the year round. 4 annas for going 8 miles upwards and 8 miles downwards, not less than twice a day. Altogether, 32 miles up and down a mountain, 1,500 feet high, carrying a burden of 200 weight. However, India is a country where everything is adjusted to never-changing customs, and 4 annas a day is the pay for unskilled labor of any kind. Gradually, open spaces and glades became more frequent, and the light grew as intense as by day. Millions of grasshoppers were shrilling in the forest, filling the air with a metallic throbbing, and flocks of frightened parrots rushed from tree to tree. Sometimes the thundering, prolonged roars of tigers rose from the bottom of the precipices, thickly covered with all kinds of vegetation. Shikaris assure us that, on a quiet night, the roaring of these beasts can be heard for many miles around. The panorama, lit up as if by Bengal fires, changed at every turn. Rivers, fields, forests, and rocks, spread out at our feet over an enormous distance, moved and trembled, iridescent in the silvery moonlight like the tides of a mirage. The fantastic character of the pictures made us hold our breath. Our heads grew giddy if, by chance, we glanced down into the depths by the flickering moonlight. We felt that the precipice, 2,000 feet deep, was fascinating us. One of our American fellow travelers, who had begun the voyage on horseback, had to dismount, afraid of being unable to resist the temptation to dive headforemost into the abyss. Several times we met with lonely pedestrians, men and young women, coming down Mataran on their way home after a day's work. It often happens that some of them never reach home. The police unconcernedly report that the missing man has been carried off by a tiger or killed by a snake. All is said, and he is soon entirely forgotten. One person, more or less, out of the 240 millions who inhabit India does not matter much, but there exists a very strange superstition in the Deccan about this mysterious and only partially explored mountain. The natives assert that, in spite of the considerable number of victims, there has never been found a single skeleton. The corpse, whether intact or mangled by tigers, is immediately carried away by the monkeys, who, in the latter case, gather the scattered bones and bury them skillfully in deep holes, that no traces ever remain. Englishmen laugh at this superstition, but the police do not deny the fact of the entire disappearance of the bodies. When the sides of the mountain were excavated, in the course of the construction of the railway, separate bones, with the marks of tigers' teeth upon them, broken bracelets and other adornments, were found at an incredible depth from the surface. The fact of these things being broken showed clearly that they were not buried by men, because neither the religion of the Hindus nor their greed would allow them to break and bury silver and gold. Is it possible, then, that, as amongst men one hand washes the other, so in the animal kingdom one species conceals the crimes of another? Having spent the night in a Portuguese inn, woven like an eagle's nest out of bamboos, and clinging to the almost vertical side of a rock, we rose at daybreak and, having visited all the points de vue famed for their beauty, made our preparations to return to Narelle. By daylight, the panorama was still more splendid than by night. Volumes would not suffice to describe it. Had it not been that on three sides the horizon was shut out by rugged ridges of mountain, the whole of the Deccan Plateau would have appeared before our eyes. Bombay was so distinct that it seemed quite near to us, and the channel that separates the town from Salsetta shone like a tiny silvery streak. It winds like a snake on its way to the port, surrounding Canary and other islets, which look the very image of green peas scattered on the white cloth of its bright waters, and finally joins the blinding line of the Indian Ocean in the extreme distance. On the outer side is the northern Konkan, terminated by the Talgats, the needle-like summits of the Jano Mauli rocks, and, lastly, the battlemented ridge of Funel, whose bold silhouette stands out in strong relief against the distant blue of the dim sky, like a giant's castle in some fairy tale. Further on looms Pabul, whose flat summit in the days of old was the seat of the gods, whence, according to the legends, Vishnu spoke to mortals, and there below, where the defile widens into a valley, all covered with huge separate rocks, each of which is crowded with historical and mythological legends, you may perceive the dim blue ridge of mountains, still loftier and still more strangely shaped. That is Khandala, which is overhung by a huge stone block, known by the name of the Duke's Nose. On the opposite side, under the very summit of the mountain, is situated Karli, which, according to the unanimous opinion or archaeologists, is the most ancient and best preserved of Indian cave temples. One who has traversed the passes of the Caucasus again and again, one who, from the top of the Cross Mountain, has beheld beneath her feet thunderstorms and lightnings, who has visited the Alps and the Rigi, who is well acquainted with the Andes and Cordilleras, and knows every corner of the Catskills in America, may be allowed, I hope, the expression of a humble opinion. The Caucasian mountains, I do not deny, are more majestic than Ghats of India, and their splendor cannot be dimmed by comparison with these, but their beauty is of a type, if I may use this expression. At their sight one experiences true delight, but at the same time a sensation of awe. One feels like a pygmy before these titans of nature, but in India, the Himalayas excepted, mountains produce quite a different impression. The highest summits of the Deccan, as well as of the triangular ridge that fringes northern Hindustan, and of the eastern Ghats, do not exceed 3,000 feet. Only in the Ghats of the Malabar coast, from Cape Comorin to the river Surat, are there heights of 7,000 feet above the surface of the sea, so that no comparison can be drawn between these and the hoary-headed patriarch Elbrus or Kazbek, which exceeds 18,000 feet. The chief and original charm of Indian mountains wonderfully consists in their capricious shapes. Sometimes these mountains, or rather separate volcanic peaks standing in a row, form chains, but it is more common to find them scattered, to the great perplexity of geologists, without visible cause, in places where the formation seems quite unsuitable. Spacious valleys, surrounded by high walls of rock, over the very ridge of which passes the railway, are common. Look below, and it will seem to you that you are gazing upon the studio of some whimsical Titanic sculptor, filled with half-finished groups, statues, and monuments. Here is a dreamland bird, seated upon the head of a monster 600 feet high, spreading its wings and widely gaping its dragon's mouth. By its side, the bust of a man, surmounted by a helmet, battlemented like the walls of a feudal castle. There, again, new monsters devouring each other, statues with broken limbs, disorderly heaps of huge balls, lonely fortresses with loopholes, ruined towers and bridges. All this scattered and intermixed with shapes changing incessantly like the dreams of delirium. And the chief attraction is that nothing here is the result of art. Everything is the pure sport of nature, which, however, has occasionally been turned to account by ancient builders. The art of man in India is to be sought in the interior of the earth, not on its surface. Ancient Hindus seldom built their temples otherwise than in the bosom of the earth, as though they were ashamed of their efforts or did not dare to rival the sculpture of nature. Having chosen, for instance, a pyramidal rock or a cupola-shaped hillock like Elephanta or Karli, they scraped away inside, according to the Puranas, for centuries, planning on so grand a style that no modern architecture has been able to conceive anything to equal it. Fables about the Cyclops seem truer in India than in Egypt. The marvelous railroad from Narol to Kandala reminds one of a similar line from Genoa up the Apennines. One may be said to travel in the air, not on land. The railway traverses a region 1,400 feet above Konkan, and, in some places, while one rail is laid on the sharp edge of the rock, the other is supported on vaults and arches. The Malikindi Viaduct is 163 feet high. For 2 hours we hastened on between sky and earth, with abysses on both sides thickly covered with mango trees and bananas. Truly, English engineers are wonderful builders. The pass of Porgat is safely accomplished, and we are in Kandala. Our bungalow here is built on the very edge of a ravine, which nature herself has carefully concealed under a cover of the most luxuriant vegetation. Everything is in blossom, and, in this unfathomed recess, a botanist might find sufficient material to occupy him for a lifetime. Palms have disappeared. For the most part, they grow only near the sea. Here they are replaced by bananas, mango trees, pipals, ficus religiosa, fig trees, and thousands of other trees and shrubs, unknown to such outsiders as ourselves. The Indian flora is too often slandered and misrepresented as being full of beautiful but scentless flowers. At some seasons this may be true enough, but, as long as jasmines, the various balsams, white tuberoses, and golden champaka or frangipani are in blossom, this statement is far from being true. The aroma of champa alone is so powerful as to make one almost giddy. For size, it is the king of flowering trees, and hundreds of them were in full bloom just at this time of year on Mataran and Kandala. We sat on the veranda, talking and enjoying the surrounding views, until well-nigh midnight. Everything slept around us. Kandala is nothing but a big village, situated on the flat top of one of the mountains of the Sahyadra range, about 2,200 feet above the sea level. It is surrounded by isolated peaks, as strange in shape as any we have seen. One of them, straight before us, on the opposite side of the abyss, looked exactly like a long, one-storied building, with a flat roof and a battlemented parapet. The Hindus assert that, somewhere about this hillock, there exists a secret entrance, leading into vast interior halls, in fact to a whole subterranean palace, and that there still exist people who possess the secret of this abode. A holy hermit, yogi, and magus, who had inhabited these caves for many centuries, imparted this secret to Shivaji, the celebrated leader of the Maratha armies. Like Tannhauser, in Wagner's opera, the unconquerable Shivaji spent 7 years of his youth in this mysterious abode, and therein acquired his extraordinary strength and valor. Shivaji is a kind of Indian Ilya Muromets, though his epoch is much nearer to our times. He was the hero and the king of the Marathas in the 17th century, and the founder of their short-lived empire. It is to him that India owes the weakening, if not the entire destruction, of the Mussulman yoke. No taller than an ordinary woman, and with the hand of a child, he was, nevertheless, possessed of wonderful strength, which of course his compatriots ascribed to sorcery. His sword is still preserved in a museum, and one cannot help wondering at its size and weight, and at the hilt through which only a 10-year-old child could put his hand. The basis of this hero's fame is the fact that he, the son of a poor officer in the service of a Mughal emperor, like another David, slew the Mussulman Goliath, the formidable Afzal Khan. It was not, however, with a sling that he killed him. He used in this combat the formidable Marathi weapon, Vagnak, consisting of 5 long steel nails, as sharp as needles, and very strong. This weapon is worn on the fingers, and wrestlers use it to tear each other's flesh like wild animals. The Deccan is full of legends about Shivaji, and even the English historians mention him with respect. Just as in the fable respecting Charles V, one of the local Indian traditions asserts that Shivaji is not dead, but lives secreted in one of the Sahyadra caves. When the fateful hour strikes, and according to the calculations of the astrologers the time is not far off, he will reappear and will bring freedom to his beloved country. The learned and artful Brahmins, those Jesuits of India, profit by the profound superstition of the masses to extort wealth from them, sometimes to the last cow, the only food giver of a large family. In the following passage I give a curious example of this. At the end of July 1879, this mysterious document appeared in Bombay. I translate literally from the Marathi, the original having been translated into all the dialects of India, of which there are 273. Shri, an untranslatable greeting. Let it be known unto everyone that this epistle, traced in the original in golden letters, came down from Indraloka, the heaven of Indra, in the presence of holy Brahmans, on the altar of the Vishveshvara temple, which is in the sacred town of Benares. Listen and remember, O tribes of Hindustan, Rajasthan, Punjab, etc., etc. On Saturday, the 2nd day of the first half of the month, Magha, 1809, of Shalivahan's era, 1887 AD, the 11th month of the Hindus, during the Ashwini Nakshatra, the first of the 27 constellations on the moon's path, when the sun enters the sign Capricorn, and the time of the day will be near the constellation Pisces, that is to say, exactly 1 hour and 36 minutes after sunrise. the hour of the end of the Kali Yuga will strike, and the much-desired Satya Yuga will commence. That is to say, the end of the Mahayuga, the great cycle that embraces the 4 minor yugas. This time, Satya Yuga will last 1,100 years. During all this time, a man's lifetime will be 128 years. The days will become longer and will consist of 20 hours and 48 minutes, and the nights of 13 hours and 12 minutes. That is to say, instead of 24 hours, we shall have exactly 34 hours and 1 minute. The first day of Satya Yuga will be very important for us, because it is then that will appear to us our new king with white face and golden hair, who will come from the far north. He will become the autonomous Lord of India. The Maya of human unbelief, with all the heresies over which it presides, will be thrown down to Patala, signifying at once hell and the antipodes. And the Maya of the righteous and pious will abide with them and will help them to enjoy life in Maratanloka, our earth. Let it also be known to everyone that, for the dissemination of this divine document, every separate copy of it will be rewarded by the forgiveness of as many sins as are generally forgiven when a pious man sacrifices to a Brahmin 100 cows. As for the disbelievers and the indifferent, they will be sent to Naraka, hell. Copied out and given by the slave of Vishnu, Malau Shriram, on Saturday, the 7th day of the first half of Shravan, the 5th month of the Hindu year. 1801. Of Shalavalian's era, that is, the 26th of July, 1879. The further career of this ignorant and cunning epistle is not known to me. Probably the police put a stop to its distribution. This only concerns the wise administrators, but it splendidly illustrates from one side the credulity of the populace, drowned in superstition, and from the other, the unscrupulousness of the Brahmans. Concerning the word Patala, which literally means the opposite side, a recent discovery of Swami Dayanand Saraswati, whom I have already mentioned in the preceding letters, is interesting, especially if this discovery can be accepted by philologists, as the facts seem to promise. Dayanand tries to show that the ancient Aryans knew and even visited America, which in ancient MSS is called Patala, and out of which popular fancy constructed, in the course of time, something like the Greek Hades. He supports his theory by many quotations from the oldest MSS, especially from the legends about Krishna and his favorite disciple Arjuna. In the history of the latter, it is mentioned that Arjuna, one of the 5 Pandavas, descendants of the Moon dynasty, visited Patala on his travels, and there married the widowed daughter of King Nagwal, called Ilupal. Comparing the names of father and daughter, we reach the following considerations, which speak strongly in favor of Dayanand's supposition. 1. Nagual is the name by which the sorcerers of Mexico, Indians, and Aborigines of America are still designated. Like the Assyrian and Chaldean Nargals, chiefs of the Magi, the Mexican Nagual unites in his person the functions of priest and of sorcerer, being served in the latter capacity by a demon in the shape of some animal, generally a snake or a crocodile. These Naguals are thought to be the descendants of Nagua, the king of the snakes. Abbé Brasseur de Bourbourg devotes a considerable amount of space to them in his book about Mexico, and says that the Naguals are servants of the evil one, who, in his turn, renders them but a temporary service. In Sanskrit, likewise, snake is Naga, and the king of the Nagas plays an important part in the history of Buddha. And in the Puranas, there exists a tradition that it was Arjuna who introduced snake worship into Patala. The coincidence and the identity of the names are so striking that our scientists really ought to pay some attention to them. 2. The name of Arjuna's wife, Ilupal, is purely Old Mexican, and if we reject the hypothesis of Swami Dayanand, it will be perfectly impossible to explain the actual existence of this name in Sanskrit manuscripts long before the Christian era. Of all ancient dialects and languages, it is only in those of the American Aborigines that you constantly meet with such combinations of consonants as pel, tl, etc. They are abundant, especially in the language of the Toltecs, or Nahuatl, whereas neither in Sanskrit nor in ancient Greek are they ever found at the end of a word. Even the words Atlas and Atlantis seem to be foreign to the etymology of the European languages. Wherever Plato may have found them, it was not he who invented them. In the Toltec language we find the root atl, which means water and war, and directly after America was discovered, Columbus found a town called Atlan, at the entrance of the Bay of Uraga. It is now a poor fishing village called Aklo. Only in America does one find such names as Itzcoatl, Zimpaltacatl, and Popocatépetl. To attempt to explain such coincidences by the theory of blind chance would be too much. Consequently, as long as science does not seek to deny Dayanan's hypothesis, which as yet it is unable to do, we think it reasonable to adopt it, be it only in order to follow out the axiom, one hypothesis is equal to another. Amongst other things, Dayanan points out that the route that led Arjuna to America 5,000 years ago was by Siberia and Bering Straits. It was long past midnight, but we still sat listening to this legend and others of a similar kind. At length, the innkeeper sent a servant to warn us of the dangers that threatened us if we lingered too long on the veranda on a moonlit night. The program of these dangers was divided into 3 sections: snakes, beasts of prey, and dacoits. Besides the cobra and the rock snake, the surrounding mountains are full of a kind of very small mountain snake called furzin, the most dangerous of all. Their poison kills with the swiftness of lightning. The moonlight attracts them, and whole parties of these uninvited guests crawl up to the verandas of houses in order to warm themselves. Here they are more snug than on the wet ground. The verdant and perfumed abyss below our veranda happened, too, to be the favourite resort of tigers and leopards, who come thither to quench their thirst at the broad brook which runs along the bottom, and then wander until daybreak under the windows of the bungalow. Lastly, there were the mad dacoits, whose dens are scattered in mountains inaccessible to the police, who often shoot Europeans simply to afford themselves the pleasure of sending ad patres one of the hateful belatis, foreigners. 3 days before our arrival, the wife of a Brahman disappeared, carried off by a tiger, and 2 favourite dogs of the commandant were killed by snakes. We declined to wait for further explanations, but hurried to our rooms. At daybreak, we were to start for Karli, 6 miles from this place,